perspective. So I'm happy to have 4 participants joining me in that discussion. So first of all, we have you, Luca, which is not a huge surprise. And you made your introduction already on MS Direct. But we have also Martina, who's coming to us from Everdrop, which is a company producing sustainable and stylish household products and cosmetics. Most of us know them probably from washing powder in a different format. Let's phrase it like that. I'm happy to have this perspective. We also have Nicolas, who is joining us from Nikin, which is a fashion brand focusing on sustainability and trying to plant more trees than anyone else, I would say, who's in the fashion industry, but we will discuss that as well. And we also have Vanessa, who's joining us from Climate Partner, which is a solution provider for climate action, which is primarily, I would say, a mixture of software company and also consultancy, because you know how it always is, right? You have all the information that you get out of different data source, if you get any. Let's be transparent on that one as well. But then you need someone to put it into perspective, and I think that's where Climate Partner is the right partner, as the wording says already. So looking forward for this discussion, and I hope I did not made any big mistakes on introducing the 4 of you. And let's straight hop into it, and just to ensure that we have the full picture also for the participants who are focused in logistics and stuff like that, I would like to get a brief understanding of the volumes and the logistics we are talking about from Everdrop and Nikin perspective, just so we get an understanding. Are we talking about like 5 shipments a day, where people might claim, well, we can make that sustainability, or are we talking about a different scale? I would say ladies first as always. Martina, do you want to start to give us just a short perspective of what Everdrop is about to send per day or whatever, and how your logistics look like?
Yes, sure, Andreas, thank you. I'd love to have the good old times when we had the 5 parcels per day. I'm now approximately talking about, let's say the range between 50 and 80,000 parcels per month. When we talk about D2C, and then we're also talking about retail, there's a couple of partners, they would talk about a couple of hundreds of pallets per month that get handed over to the partners. So yeah, important topic to really discuss the volumes and the sustainability behind it. Nicolas, I hand over to you directly.
Sure. I mean, in our case, I mean, the D2C part is the biggest. I mean, we ship around 100, 200,000 packages per year. And I mean, per day, it depends really on the season. It can be from only 200 up to 1.5, 2,000 in maybe December. So it really depends on the season in the end.
Makes sense. Thanks for these impressive numbers. And one additional short question: are you handling these on your own, or is there someone externally handling your fulfillment?
I mean, in our case, we did it by ourselves for a very long time. Now we outsourced it around 2 years ago because we just couldn't handle it anymore. Like, we moved about 4 times, and at some point we had to take the decision.
Fair point. Martina, can you add that as well?
Yeah, same for us. We have a centralized approach, currently third-party logistics. And when it comes to shipping it to different countries, I think it's no surprise that we might work with MS Direct also. It's a centralized approach, outsourced, having the core competencies with that partner.
Cool. That leads us straight to Luca. Luca, question into your direction. When it comes to sustainability and outsourcing of operations, do you see and feel that there are some additional changes when it comes to the requirements of sustainability? I think everybody is aware that in long history of logistics, outsourcing was a topic of cost, and that's it. Do you see a change in that perspective, Luca?
Yes, I definitely see a change in that. Of course, costs play still a major role, but particularly for sustainable brands, this is a key topic. You already see it in tenders. So it's always usually part of the tender process. The question, of course, is how much this then rules in, and how important this criteria is then for the decision. But I definitely see that from the more the brands who really take an important step and role in sustainability, this is a key decision criteria. So how the warehouses are operated, how they are heated, where do you get the energy from, the packaging solutions you can offer and you will process. Yeah, so definitely I see here a strong importance and getting more important even. Yeah,
that's a handful of examples already, Vanessa. To have all of these numbers and figures by hand, I'm pretty sure, and I'm not trying to be not optimistic enough, but I'm pretty sure that these type of information that Luca just mentioned as just some examples are not necessarily available for many of the companies even today, right? Even with the ESRS requirements in front of us in the European Union, for instance. But how is the status quo, and how do you see that?
This is a very good point. Data collection and the quality of data is actually still a huge challenge, I would say, for our clients to really find data in a good quality for all different kind of steps within a production, for instance, or also logistics. I would say we're always able to find a way, a workaround if the data quality is not yet up to speed. However, we try to have as many primary data as possible to really have a very accurate picture of the CO2 footprint of the company, of its logistics, etc. However, we also need to take into account or bear in mind that we want to have a pragmatic approach to also help the client to really find these data as intuitively as fast as possible, to then deep dive into the next step, which would be setting reduction targets and implementing reduction measurements. Because for me, or for Climate Partner, this is actually the steps where climate action really starts. We need the good data, we need the CO2 footprint as a base, but from there on, it gets even more interesting to really deep dive into the topic of reductions.
That's a really fair point. And I remember, also to be transparent here, I remember from projects I made on my own that for some of the data sets you try together also with a software-based approach, a lot of stuff also depends on vendors who might be anywhere in this world. And I'm not finger pointing here, but data collection in some other parts of the world where we might not be that active in regards to the climate protection is a bit difficult, right? So that's where I typically start having surveys, as I remember, as an approach. But how do I ensure that I have good data also from vendors that are not sharing the same vision in these terms? Let's phrase it like this.
We very much encourage our clients to talk to their suppliers and vendors to really have this discussion going on, because the deeper you can go into the different tiers, the better the quality will be that you will receive. However, we're very aware of this process being highly complex and needing a lot of patience as well. So there, as you said before in the very nice introduction about Climate Partner, we really want to be the partners supporting our clients in the whole process of data collection. However, there is still a lot of secondary data that we use for our calculations, because as you said, at some point it's just very difficult to really get the best granularity of data. But the more also our clients ask their suppliers or ask their vendors for data, the more awareness we will get over the whole community or over the whole network of a company. And this is also something that we want to reach. And we also have specific solutions to get into this discussion with the whole network. It's called networking platform. Nomen ist Omen.
Nicolas, we also saw, it was in the keynote, we saw some examples in terms of fast fashion, and I'm pretty sure that if you heard the word fast in front of fashion, you already get a headache. But how do you solve that? Do you own the whole supply chain, or how do you select vendors, for instance, to ensure that they also commit to your targets and also to commit to your perspective of a company? And I assume that or I feel that your company is built on sustainability, right? I mean, the icon of your company is a tree, and that's not for fun. So how do you ensure that the whole end-to-end supply chain is as sustainable as possible?
I mean, if we just talk about vendors, in the end, it's rather easy. I mean, or easier than, let's say, when it comes to manufacturer sub, or the people that actually do the material. I mean, we just have our criteria, and then based on that, decide if we work with them. And so far, for example, when we talk about also marketplaces, we said no to Zalando, About You, and Amazon and so on, because we do not offer free returns on purpose. and therefore have a very low return rate. But therefore, it's for us clear that at this moment, at least, Zalando is not an option for us. And yeah, and we often, of course, try to visit them and talk to them, but that's about it. I mean, we're not going as deep as looking at exact measurements and so on, but that's it. I could talk more about the let's say manufacturing side, but in the vendor side, it's basically that.
When it comes to sustainability, is that only the ecological part of it, or do you also look into how human resources are used, for instance, like the working conditions and stuff like that? Is that also something you're looking into when visiting the facilities, for instance?
I mean, when it comes down to the manufacturing process, yeah, there for sure. I mean, we're visiting almost all of them. We are GOT certified work almost in, let's say, bodywear, mostly only with GOT certified suppliers together. I mean, there are also criteria such as social aspects are checked. I mean, there I think there's many things, and also maybe that's a bit more to what Vanessa said. We are right now onboarding all our suppliers and their whole supply chain onto a tool called Retraced, and that's actually the first step before we can do anything further that comes to really measuring the CO2 footprint. But that's really not so easy, to be very honest, to go even a step further down the whole or back the whole supply chain. But this is in the end what we're doing. But now on the vendor side, to be very honest, to be transparent there, we're not checking how the working conditions are, because it's mostly in Switzerland and in Germany. And there, at least since we're not working with many big ones, are assuming that it's fine. But yeah, good point. That's maybe something to also go into.
Good, we are here in a discussion and not in a lecture where just say that's how it is. We can discuss things, and I like that about panel discussions the most. Martina, how is that on your end? I assume producing everything which is cosmetics and household products is already quite limited in regards to possibilities of what you can do because of several requirements by law, I assume. Not even being deeply into it, but how do you handle all of this?
And it's lovely that I have to say there's a lot of potential, not only by being convinced about it, but really analyzing it. So when we started, it was a jungle of what to do and what not to do, and what to use and not to use. And what Vanessa also said, going into those conversations and understand what is your impact has been the first thing that we wanted to understand. And when it comes to cosmetics and to chemical products, when you understand that the raw material side, so which chemicals you use, have the huge impact, that's where you actually tackle the first activities. So when developing products, we really have to look into what are the most sustainable raw materials, and are these the right ones, and where are they produced. So what Vanessa said, going into the dialogues with suppliers or with partners has been a revolution for some of them, because they have to offer transparency into their former supply chains that they were not used to. And that's what we try to explain them, that we kind of see ourselves as a pilot for the market in 5 to 10 years, where this request might be mandatory, also due to changes by law. And that's how we open up those discussions. But being honest, that hasn't been easy for a while. Also understanding the complexities behind the raw materials. It's not only the chemicals, but we also work with the recycled plastic side, with wood side. So lots of dialogues. And what I really see, and what I love, that we just conducted our LCA and PCF, everything you've just seen before, the impact receipt. We wanted to understand what our impact receipt looks like. And not doing, you say in Germany, you say verschlimmbessern, so worsen it for the better. So being honest to ourselves. So yeah, there is a huge potential that other companies might ignore due to cost perspectives.
Going down the line of supply chain, there's tons of transport in between. And I think when it comes to sustainability and all of these topics, transport is a huge topic. And I would say a lot of people focusing on it, and without trying to be naive, I would say, okay, someone will solve that somehow with different fuels, with transparency. You can track trucks pretty well, and all of that stuff is working. But apparently, there's also a lot of stuff happening between transporting from manufacturer to the final destination. There's some warehousing happening in between, and I feel at least that that doesn't play a huge role within the whole supply chain. And I would just ask Luca again on that topic and challenge you a little bit on that one. I mean, we spoke about electricity and heating, but is that really all we need to focus from a warehousing perspective? That's it? That seems to be easy to solve, right?
No, that's not all. I mean, it's just a part. And I agree with you that transportation definitely is a key element in the whole supply chain. And but in the warehouse, you can also do a lot. So for me, at the end, it's a lot about efficiency. Yeah. So how do we use space? And that not only relates how we use truck space, but also how do we use warehouse space. I mean, we know that many trucks are driving empty or half empty. So if we can give them a better load, and avoid empty trucks, then I think a lot is done on the efficiency side, but at the same side also on the sustainability side. And that's the same thing on the warehouse. So it depends what you look at. So it is about energy consumption and using green energy or biogas. It's about handling waste. Yeah. So in return management, all the empty parcels. Yeah. So it's about separating waste, plastic and cartonnage. But yeah, it goes much further. I mean, when it comes to density, how we store, how we use effectively a warehouse space, because at the end we need to kind of either heat, yeah, or use electricity to light it. But interestingly, when it comes to our balance sheet and our greenhouse gas emissions, the biggest pain point is the mobility of our employees. So that's the interesting fact, and so it's really the biggest driver for us. And so, what can you do in that regards? Yeah. So so we have, for instance, tripled our contribution for a monthly or annual public transportation subscription. So to incentivize our employees to make use of public transportation, or also bike. You can subsidize the use and the purchase of e-bikes. We have introduced a carpooling app. So not everyone is driving with its own car, but you can really pool the ride to. We operate in shifts, and shifts start early and finish late. So sometimes the public transportation is also not the best option. Still, I mean, and also to incentivize the use of carpooling, we have raised the prices for the parking lots to our employees. So they are not cost-free. They have never been, but or for a long time. But now we have even raised it, and yeah, you get also some reaction about that. But that's all the way to get down on this level. Of course, we will. I mean, we already use a large part of our fleet is electric, and also the trucks we will switch latest next year to that level. So I think that's the part when you come to the warehousing. One thing not to forget maybe about automation and robotics. I think that is an interesting topic. So we have started now to move into the area and of building a small piece storage systems with 48 robots. You see it in my background. And you can say, hey, robots, they also consume energy, but they really consume a very small fraction. So in the selection process, we paid a lot of attention on what the consumption of these robots is. And yeah, of course, with robots, you don't need light. You don't need heating, as long as it's maybe not chilling and freezing. So there, and you can store and work much denser. Yeah, so I think that's on that side, it also has a positive aspect. So that's what comes to my mind when it comes to warehousing.
It's a super interesting perspective, and thanks for sharing also the figures here and or the perspective that the commuting is actually one of the core topic, and also considering the bigger picture of warehousing. That's actually a huge struggle, I assume, since typically you build warehouses as remote as possible, just close to an autobahn or to an airport, but not necessarily where people live. So that's a huge topic to be solved, I assume. And also considering the warehousing perspective, it's always like a tricky thing where to start, right? And where to get started. You mentioned packaging, for instance, and we hear a couple on that perspective as well in the startup pitches later on. But even with packaging, right? There's even discussions just around like, okay, can I use plastic bags because they are smaller? Is plastic really better or worse than carton? Is it? Then there's discussion pro and contra against it. And you can spend, it feels like your whole life just to figuring out which parcel to be used. Vanessa, what is the first shot and maybe like a quick tip on where to start in your warehouse journey to get transparency and to immediately fix something?
Well, you mentioned already quite a lot of very interesting points. Packaging, of course, is something to look into, but this can be an endless discussion, as you just mentioned. So something that Luke has already mentioned before is the easiest thing is to change to green electricity. Sounds so simple. Nevertheless, there is still quite a lot of companies who have not done that yet. And this is really something that we call a low-hanging fruit. But then, of course, you have to deep dive into the numbers to really understand where your current situation is, where the current situation is of your whole company, to see which is bringing the biggest driver. What Luca just mentioned before, the mobility of employees, this is not surprising, actually, to have there the biggest leverage to look into how to optimize your CO2 footprint. This is also something that we can see represented in the greenhouse gas in the inventory of Switzerland, of the whole country, that traffic is having the biggest share of emissions, over 30% of the whole inventory of Switzerland. And this is something that goes back to the employee commuting, as well as the transportation of goods and services, of course. So it's always relevant to keep the big picture in mind, to see where you do have the biggest potential to optimize your CO2 footprint, while not neglecting the other points. So this is now a very high level reply to your question. It's always easy to point out the best way for a company to reduce their footprint without knowing exactly what their footprint is. So I would recommend the companies to come and talk to us, and we help them to optimize their footprint.
That sounds like a really fair approach, and thank you for that. Thank you for that. And I think that's also good last word, since we only had a limited slot for the discussion, so we had no time for bullshit, which I always like. Nobody had the need to drop some thoughts that we don't need. So really happy about that. Thanks for the different perspectives, everyone. And I'm handing over to Georgia now, since I haven't seen that any questions popped up. If there are any questions, you can drop them now or later on to the specific participants of the discussion through whatever channel you like to use.